Hello, and welcome to another episode of PodcastDX, the show that brings you interviews with people just like you whose lives were forever changed by a medical diagnosis. I'm Lita. Ron is not with us today.
And I'm Jean Marie.
Collectively, we're the hosts of PodcastDX. On today's show, we're speaking with Dr. Terri Pease. Terri Pease, PhD, is a highly experienced professional in the social services and healthcare industries who has dedicated her working life to helping people who are facing highly stressful situations. You could move in over here, Terri.
Yeah.
We got work for you. She has trained staff in organizations around the United States to offer supportive, empathetic, and effective trauma-informed care to those who need it most. When Terri married her husband, who was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease before they met, she brought her confidence and a wealth of knowledge and experience to bear on caring for him. Her professional experience has informed her approach to caregiving and to encouraging Parkinson's caregivers to make self-care real, practical, and possible. In addition to her work as an author and caregiver advocate, Terri continues to post information, support, and resources at www.seaburyhouse.com. That's SeaburyHouse.com. I'll put a link for that on our website. Terri is joining us today to discuss caregiving for someone with Parkinson's. Thank you so much for joining our show today, Dr. Pease.
Jean Marie, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
No problem. Terri, could you start us off by telling us exactly what is Parkinson's disease?
Absolutely. Parkinson's disease is a disorder of the brain, and it's sometimes called a movement disorder.
Mm-hmm.
It's caused by a deficiency in the neurotransmitter dopamine with really wide-ranging effects.
Okay. In your wonderful book, Love, Dignity, and Parkinson's, From Care Partner to Caregiver, you talk about the caregiver partner's need to understand the potential emotional and personality changes that they may see in their partner. How can such knowledge help caregivers, friends, and family members and the individual that's living with Parkinson's disease?
Well, I think it's important to get information early on, in part because people come into this very engaged in wanting to help their partners, but with not very much information.
Mm-hmm.
And they sort of discover, as I did, I discovered as I went along what I needed to know, how I could be the best support to my husband, and how we could live the most comfortable and engaged, connected life that we could, given his diagnosis.
Because it's all really going to be personalized based on the individual person that has the disease, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, there's a saying that if you've seen one person with Parkinson's disease, you've seen one person
Mm-hmm.
with Parkinson's. And the symptoms vary widely from person to person.
Okay, thank you.
And Terri, what do you feel is the biggest misconception about Parkinson's disease?
Well, there's a big one, which is that Parkinson's is only a disease of the body. It's only a disease of movement, shaking, body tremors, sticky feet. People have difficulty walking. And it's only over time that people come to understand that there's a great deal more to Parkinson's as a brain disease than just these changes in the way the person functions in terms of motor skills and motor capacities.
Okay.
Okay. So like you were saying, the personality and emotional changes are evident as well in Parkinson's?
They are, and many times they're evident before the motor symptoms.
Oh, that's good to
And I
know.
think that's a really important point.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you may have somebody that starts changing a little bit in their mood or their general personality, and you're like, what's going on? And if they don't have the tremors yet, how do you come to some kind of a point where you say this is the doctor we need to see next?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess
that's really true.
Yeah.
And doctors often don't recognize that the changes in behavior, the changes in facial expression, and in the capacity to connect to your partner are linked to Parkinson's disease.
Hmm.
Is it a lack of affect that a person develops, or how do you notice the the problems that happen? You know, how do you?
I would think that the reason why caregivers and the family and friends notice first is because they know that individual so well, whereas their primary care provider may not.
They only see them 10 minutes every. Yeah, that's
Once a
true.
year.
That's true.
Hmm.
Yeah,
That's really true.
yeah. We're becoming more and more doctors for our family members than our doctors are sometimes.
Well, I think it's you're the baseline.
Okay. Terry, how can the medical community, lawmakers, religious leaders, and others give caregivers the support and tools that they need to provide the best care possible?
Well, I think that the community at large doesn't seem to recognize that family caregivers not only need but deserve a great deal of support. And many times people think if they ask the caregiver, how are things going? That an answer of, oh, where things are okay, or we're fine, or we're managing means that there's nothing that they're called on to do. I think paying attention to the caregiver as a support for the patient is a huge part of excellent medical care for Parkinson's.
Hmm.
Something just kind of popped in my head. The Elizabeth Dole Foundation.
Yeah.
Uh, Elizabeth Dole supports caregivers for veterans. Is there something similar for Parkinson's?
There are a number of organizations. There's the American Parkinson's Disease Association. There's the Davis Finney Foundation, which is a very active or community for caregivers of people who have Parkinson's disease.
Good. I will look them up and I'll put a link for
And
them.
and I think that's where we found you have a guided meditation on their website.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, all
Was
right.
really wonderful too. How did your interactions with with Peter's caregiver or medical community? How did that work in terms of HIPAA and your ability to garner information that you needed to help care for him?
Well, I was lucky in the sense that he gave me open permission, carte blanche, to talk to
Okay.
his doctors from right at the very beginning, but many people with Parkinson's do not. But what I think is really important for caregivers to understand is that even if a doctor can't pass information on to you, the doctor can still receive information from you.
Oh.
And so that it's possible to, and in fact, I'm working right now on a document that will help caregivers report changes because often the person with Parkinson's shows their very best self. I mean, we all
Mm-hmm.
want to look
Mm-hmm.
our best, and they show them their very best selves to the doctor. My husband, who often really struggled to walk, would, when the doctor said, "Show me how you can walk 20 feet," Peter would get up and he would just bounce along practically down the hall and back.
Mm-hmm.
And you would think, well, there's nothing wrong with this guy's mobility. And yet that was using every bit of energy he had in
Mm-hmm.
order to pull that off for that little short period of time.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, then we would look forward to learning more about that, about tracking the individual from the caregiver perspective. That's wonderful advice. Thank you. Um, and Terry, why is it important for caregivers to take care of themselves emotionally, physically, and spiritually before they can care for someone else?
Well, that's a huge, huge topic. And that's why I wrote the book that I wrote, because many times there's a myth that somehow if we really love someone and we really want to care for someone, we will just give and give and give without ceasing until we're worn to a thread.
Mm-hmm.
And many caregivers feel that uh, it's selfish or childish to say, I'm exhausted. I need help. This is too much for me to do every day all by myself. And that myth, it pervades our lives, especially for women,
Mm-hmm.
and many more people with Parkinson's are men, so that it's likely that they may have a woman as a caregiver. And so we feel like, well, if I'm a good woman, if I'm a good partner, if I'm a good person, then I'm going to give and give and give. But that doesn't work. It's simply impossible. And then you wear yourself out. And when you're exhausted, that becomes the time that you start looking for help when you barely have the energy to even say, help me.
Mm-hmm.
So from the very beginning, caregivers need to pay attention to their own well being as well as their partner.
Okay.
Great advice.
Yes.
And if they want any more, they should get your book.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think so.
Terri, why is it essential for a caregiver to learn about the progression of Parkinson's disease, the stages that they go through, and to plan for the future?
That's really important. There aren't really official stages of Parkinson's because its progression is so different from individual to individual. But it does have a general tendency to move towards greater disability and more need for support. I think if a person who's a couple, really, because at the beginning it can be more than just the caregiver, it's the caregiver and the partner together.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't take these steps early on, they miss some important opportunities. They miss the opportunity to pay attention to their finances and to organize their finances in such a way that they'll have the support that they need given the means that they have. And there's one especially important point. The Medicare system in the United States requires that you don't come to ask for Medicare if you have substantial assets. And depending on how you have worked out your finances, if you suddenly pass on your house to your wife or your partner and pass on your assets and then go to Medicare and say, please help, they'll look back 5 years to see where's your money gone? Where have
Mm-hmm.
your resources gone? So you need to plan at least 5 years in advance in order to be able to take advantage of the services. And frankly, we as workers and taxpayers pay for.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. So what you're saying that Medicare will provide more for Parkinson's care if you
Not Medicare, Medicaid.
Oh, Medicaid.
Medicaid,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. I'm sorry. Okay, got it.
That's
Yes,
an important distinction to understand.
right, right.
And we do have someone in an upcoming episode who's going to walk us through the Social Security system,
Disability. Right.
yeah, and talk about all of its different elements and how to work with the system
Okay.
to get
Oh,
the
boy.
support you need. Yeah,
I'll be there. I really want to hear that.
yeah. And Terri, what do you feel one should do as soon as they or their loved one is diagnosed with Parkinson's disease?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to just stop and connect with each other and talk to each other about it. It's scary, it's an
Mhm.
unknown, and there's no rush. Parkinson's is a long game. My husband had Parkinson's for 23 years before he died.
Okay.
And so you don't have to rush really into doing anything.
Okay.
And then there are some steps that people can take in terms of reaching out to the correct kind of physician. A movement disorder specialist is by far a better choice in most cases.
Okay.
And a movement disorder specialist is a specialized neurologist who has additional training specifically on Parkinson's and similar disorders.
Okay.
And there are not a lot of them out there. So if you got diagnosed today, it might be 4 months, 5 months before you get to the doctor. So make that appointment right away and then contact an elder care attorney right away to start talking about what you need to know in terms of finances, in terms of property and houses and so forth. And so you're in the best position you can be in.
Okay.
Great advice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now that we have discussed the basics, I think our listeners have a better understanding of this condition. In order to better serve our guests and listening audience, we are now working as an affiliate with a major medical supply warehouse located here in the United States. And you'll find our affiliate links on our website. Our goal is to tailor specific medical supplies and equipment based on individual diagnoses to make it less stressful than looking through an entire catalog for what you might need. We're open to your suggestions, and we'll add and adjust our offerings based on what you, our guests, and our listeners find helpful. But now let's get back to our show. Terri, what role should fitness have for a PWP and their caregiver?
Fitness is huge. It turns out that one of the most effective things that a person with Parkinson's can do to hold off the effects of the disease is exercise.
Right, I was just reading a study on that.
Yeah, and it was actually discovered because a Parkinson's researcher and a friend were riding in a tandem bike race across the state of Iowa, I believe. And at the end of the race, the person with Parkinson's was doing better. And
Oh.
so that led to the whole line of research
Hmm.
about exercise and Parkinson's. So I
Okay.
think that the first thing a person should do is to identify the resources in their own community. There are things like Rocksteady Boxing,
Hmm.
which is an amazing program where people use the moves of boxing and it's no contact, but it helps a person with Parkinson's to establish and maintain the best balance that they can, the best physical energy. There's also other exercise programs that are specifically tailored for Parkinson's.
All right. I will look for those and put links for those on our website. Thank you.
And Terri, could you tell us about the acronym you use in your book to encapsulate the effect of Parkinson's disease and how it can, and the effect it can have on the individual living with the disease and their connections with others?
Mhm. I decided to call this chapter Parkinson's the Thief
Mm-hmm.
because what I say is that Parkinson's steals from us. It steals from our partners and from us. And those letters stand for sleep, thinking, elimination, affection, learning, and sex and other impulses. In all of those areas, Parkinson's can change the person and it changes the relationship.
Yeah, because it's on. Those are key things. When you,
Absolutely.
yeah, when you're in a relationship. Okay.
Yeah, you need to be able to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
It's surprising when your partner seems to no longer be able to think about and do some very simple things that you expect
Mm-hmm.
and that they could do yesterday. And similarly, with bathroom issues, with emotional connection, with the ability to learn from their mistakes, and also the issues around sex and impulsivity can have a very huge impact
Yeah,
on a Parkinson's couple.
and I think you also had mentioned even gambling can become an issue, which
Yeah, dopamine is the reward chemical, it's the pleasure chemical. And so part of what can happen is that in some people, the combination of Parkinson's itself and the medications to help regulate dopamine can lead to a variety of impulse control disorders. It can take the form of sexual obsessions, it can take the form of gambling or buying, shopping repeatedly for the same thing, even kind of obsessive repairs. My husband used to, we have a piece of furniture in our house that my husband built and took apart and built and took apart and built and took apart in an obsessive kind of way. And that was a Parkinson's effect.
Wow. Wow. Were you aware of that at the time, or is it something that you learned as you were going?
I didn't anticipate it when I saw it, and it's like, why are you on that ladder at 3 o'clock in the morning? What are
Oh,
you
oh,
doing?
oh,
And
wow.
then I learned.
Wow. Yeah, you got safety issues with that.
That's right. That's right.
Did you? Yeah, just to go off script a little bit. Did you know anybody else that had Parkinson's before your husband? Well, I guess before you married your husband.
I had never met anyone with Parkinson's. I had read about it, I had learned about it in school, but what you learned in school was it was a movement disorder, that it led to sticky feet and stiff muscles, tremor, sticky feet, and stiff muscles. I had no idea of all this other stuff.
Okay. All right. Well, thank God that you had a little bit of knowledge behind you, because some people walk into an experience where their spouse or a significant other has a problem, and the spouse doesn't really know which way is up and how to start. So you had a little bit of background that had to
oh
be helpful.
yeah, and I mean I would say that she had her breadth of knowledge, or your breadth of knowledge made you not.
Perfect for the job.
I hate to say an ideal caregiver. To put
Well suited.
yes,
Well suited. Okay,
yes.
there you go. Terri, what support have you received during your healthcare journey with your husband, and what have your friends and family roles been in this process?
Well, we did something that's surprisingly common among people as we were empty nesters and we were downsizing. And so we moved 1,000 miles away from home to a place where we didn't really have a community.
Mm.
I
Oh,
don't recommend that
no, I wouldn't
because
either.
there were probably things that we could have done differently.
Okay.
But what we did was to get to know people and to really build a support system as well as we could in this new town.
Okay.
So we had excellent neighbors. The therapists and the OTs and PTs who worked with Peter were phenomenal. And basically, we just, were open to help. I think it's very easy to say, I'm fine. We tend to be individualists and to say, don't need anything. I think maybe because of my background in working with people with disabilities and understanding that it's a long term and it's a community team effort, I was open to asking for help
Okay.
relatively early on.
Okay, good.
Yeah, like I said,
Well suited.
well suited. Yes. Terri, what advice do you have for someone recently diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and what is the best advice you've received for being a caregiver?
There's so much to say about it, but I think the slow down, take your time, learn, and stay connected with your partner. If you are lucky enough to have a partner who's going to make the commitment with you to go through this process, stay connected with them, honor their engagement with you. I think that's really more important, really, than almost anything else.
Well,
Um,
how do you honor their engagement?
some of it is just good manners,
Okay.
and many people with Parkinson's are not aware that they're going to change psychologically and become less aware of their partners and less aware of their partner's needs. And so some caregiving agreements early on, so that, for example, if you and your partner are talking about the fact that you understand that, there are times when he's not going to be have as much empathy and as much support for you. Then if you've talked about that and you've said, you've made a plan about how you're going to stay connected with each other. You've made commitments to how you're going to do that. I think it helps.
I mean, that's an amazing attitude.
Well, I mean, and once again, and I know we're going to talk about this in a minute, but I feel like that's advice that every couple everywhere needs.
Yeah, no matter if there's an illness involved.
Right. You could tell that your experience and your vast knowledge really does make you a more informed human being. And it's advice that everyone could use, and it would make any relationship stronger. And thank you.
And what came to my mind when she was saying that was the fact that before she said that, I pictured the relationship being this: Parkinson's patient, caregiver, and all going this way. Caregiver to Parkinson's patient.
Okay.
But she's implying,
right,
and honestly, that it can go both ways. Until the Parkinson's patient cannot give, expect them to be your spouse still, right? Don't coddle them too much. Don't look at them as a patient. They're still your spouse.
That's absolutely right. They are still your spouse. And I think that the more that you one of the adaptations you make as a caregiver is a kind of commitment to look for the spouse inside the symptoms and to try to maintain your relationship.
I got to write that down.
Yeah.
Look for the spouse.
It helps to have had a strong relationship before Parkinson's hits.
Sure.
I mean, we were unusual because Peter had Parkinson's when we met. And I didn't know enough to know that it was going to be hard and scary. And I kind of knew, but I also kept thinking, oh, this guy is really right up my alley. He's just exactly the right person for me. So I think, that helps for sure.
Sure.
And I didn't know how to phrase this or ask, but I guess no matter what relationship you're entering into, there are unknowns and anything can happen. So having it as a known up front, not that would make it easier by any means, but it's just an interesting dynamic to see in a relationship.
Life is hard. And I think if we are surprised that something is going to come along to make it difficult, I mean, we're pretending to ourselves, because life is difficult. We all age. We all, have illnesses from time to time. And we are all on a one-way track towards the end of our lives. And if you are open to that knowledge and easy with that knowledge that there are going to be times when you're ill, you're going to be times when you're scared, and that that's natural and it's human, then I think you're able to give each other much more grace. And that worked for us. And that's what I'm trying to share with other caregivers is how to find that grace in the midst of the struggles of caregiving.
Excellent,
Yeah.
excellent advice. And as I said, we're working as an affiliate to sell products. Are there any supplies or medical equipment that you absolutely could not have done without? You don't have to mention brand names, but if one brand did seem better than another, that's okay. Our audience might benefit from that too. Anything in the Parkinson's caregiving arena that you definitely would suggest to other people that they need to get their hands on?
Well, I think that you need to be advised by someone like an OT about things like this. But we used something called it's a powered bicycle, stationary bike with power.
Okay.
And that really helped my husband. The brand that he used was a TheraCycle, and I thought it was really terrific. I believe that it gave him at least a year and a half more mobility than he would have had. There's a specialized walker called a U-step walker, which is designed for people with Parkinson's. And it's more stable and less likely to run away with a person with Parkinson's
Okay.
than the conventional walker.
Mm-hmm.
And in things like incontinence supplies are really important. And to recognize that there are better, um, more substantial brands that are intended not for everyday incontinence problems, but are intended for the dramatic incontinence problems that come with disorders like Parkinson's, and to reach out to medical supply companies to get those resources as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I think our listeners will
Mm-hmm.
too. And Terri, I know that you wrote your book focusing on Parkinson's disease. However, I couldn't help but notice that so much of it would also apply to caregivers of those with dementia and many other conditions. What are your plans for the future projects? Can we look forward to a caregiver guidebook in the future for life?
Well, that's a great idea. I mean, I already have a downloadable workbook that goes with the book that I wrote, which is intended to make it easier for caregivers to walk through the information. And you're right that while some of the specifics in my book describe Parkinson's, many of the things that I talk about would be just as relevant to people being caregivers for someone else who's lost who's losing aspects of their recognizable self. And so absolutely, I've had readers um, say that I never helped someone with Parkinson's, but this would help me or would have
Mm-hmm.
helped me with my parent who had dementia, for example.
Great,
Right.
great.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and just so you know, we always will post if we have guests that have books. We'll always post a copy of your book on our website, and that
A
is not
link.
something that we get affiliate marketing for. That's yours, but we want to support you in any way we can.
Right. We'll put a link to your website
Right.
into the book.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that because I really just want to get the word out
Mm-hmm.
that you don't have to face this by yourself and you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Learn from the experience of others.
What was the best part of caregiving with your husband?
He was funny.
Oh.
He was so funny. And even when he was, largely gone, out of nowhere, he'd pop up with some smart alecky comment that would have me laughing uproariously. And that was such a joyful thing to have that little moment of him.
So
And
so
being
he regained he kept his sense of humor.
times, not always, because there
Okay.
were times he was miserable and uncomfortable and
No, yeah,
scared, but
we all are. But that's nice that he had that sense of humor at the end too.
he could make me laugh. And that went a long way.
Sure, that's great. And before we wrap up the conversation, is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about?
Well, I just would like to let caregivers know that, I mean, the work that I do with my resources at seaburyhouse.com and
Mm-hmm.
other places, there are people out there and other caregivers out there who are interested in your experience and who want to be a connection to you. There are groups online, and don't feel like there's some prize for doing it all on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Reach for help, ask for help, and know that you're entitled to help.
Yeah, great advice. And
Thank
I think it is, like you said, it's we do tend to feel like we have to sacrifice everything of ourselves. But yeah, it's great to step back and say it's not necessary. You know, and that there's resources out there.
Well, thank you very much for joining our show today, Terri. It was really a
You're
pleasure.
welcome.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
we'll include links on our webpage again for this episode. And if anyone has any questions or comments related to today's show, they can contact us at PodcastDX@yahoo.com. And if you have a moment to spare, give us a review and let us know what you're thinking about the podcast. As always, please keep in mind that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment and before undertaking a new healthcare regime. And never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this podcast.
Till next week.